It was a humid summer evening in late June. Thunder rumbled in the distance as dark clouds gathered over the small diner on the edge of town in rural Tennessee. The smell of fried chicken and fresh pie drifted through the air, mixing with the low murmur of voices and the clatter of plates. Emma Richardson, 28, worked behind the counter with steady hands, though her shoulders carried invisible weight. Her brown hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple white t-shirt tucked into worn black jeans. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, she greeted each patron with warmth, her voice gentle and sincere. It was approaching 6 p.m., and the dinner crowd was beginning to filter in. She refilled ketchup bottles and stacked clean glasses, her mind wandering to whether she could squeeze in more hours at the grocery store later that week. The evening lull hadn't settled yet, and for just a heartbeat there was peace. Then the door swung open, and humid air rushed in with the man who entered. He appeared to be in his early 30s, average height, athletic build, with sandy hair darkened by the humidity. His clothing was unremarkable. A navy t-shirt, worn khakis, a thin rain jacket now spotted with droplets. A leather messenger bag hung from his shoulder, slightly damp. His sneakers squeaked faintly on the linoleum floor. Emma glanced up automatically, offering her familiar, welcoming smile. The man walked to the counter and patted his pockets, then stopped. His face fell. He checked again, more frantically this time. He looked up, clearly embarrassed. "My wallet must still be in my truck, and my phone's dead as a doornail." Emma paused. The diner manager, Mrs. Patterson, overheard and approached quickly. "No money means no service, honey. This isn't a handout place," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for debate. The man nodded, uncomfortable, preparing to leave. "I understand. My apologies." Emma studied him for a moment. Damp, weary, perhaps a little defeated. Something in his expression caught her attention. A glimpse of genuine struggle, barely concealed beneath polite acceptance. Without speaking, she turned away from both of them, entered an order into the register, and grabbed a plate from the stack. "Chicken sandwich with fries?" she asked casually. The man blinked in surprise. "I guess so." She assembled the meal, added a side of coleslaw, and placed it in front of him. "This one's already paid for," she said quietly. Then, barely audible, "Just accept it." Mrs. Patterson frowned but remained silent. The man hesitated before stepping closer. He accepted the plate, his fingertips grazing hers momentarily. "Why would you help someone you don't even know?" he asked, genuinely confused. Emma offered a weary half-smile. "Sometimes kindness is the only currency that matters." There was a moment of stillness. He studied her, truly studied her. And in that instant, something in his demeanor changed. There was no pretense, no performance, just genuine recognition, like he'd discovered something unexpectedly precious. Her face framed by soft waves of chestnut hair, her hands rough from constant work, her eyes kind but weary, like someone who'd been fighting battles alone for far too long. That expression lingered in his gaze, longer than appropriate. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice sincere. "Really?" She gave a brief nod, already turning toward the next customer who had approached. He remained there another second, observing her like someone who'd just witnessed something authentic in a world of facades. Then he departed, taking his meal and his damp footprints with him. But Emma didn't notice the way he stopped just beyond the window, turning once to look back at the woman who had shown compassion when she had so little to spare. The sun had set completely by the time Emma stepped off the city bus and walked the remaining blocks to the childcare center, sandwiched between a hardware store and an empty lot. The sidewalk still radiated heat from the day. Her thin cardigan barely protected against the evening breeze, and her legs ached after hours of standing. The small bell chimed softly as she entered. Mrs. Chen, the older woman who managed the place, gave a concerned but friendly nod. "She's been more quiet than normal today," she said, gesturing toward the play area. Emma followed her indication. Lily, her 4-year-old daughter, sat hunched over a coloring book, small and delicate, wearing an oversized sweater despite the heat. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each inhale accompanied by a subtle wheeze. Emma knelt beside her, touching a gentle hand to Lily's forehead. The child looked up slowly and opened her eyes. "Mama," she whispered with effort. "Hey, baby girl, time to head home?" Emma smiled, masking the fear building in her chest. Lily nodded and lifted her arms. Emma thanked Mrs. Chen and stepped back into the warm night. The brief walk home felt like miles. Lily's small, warm body pressed against her, each labored breath loud in the quiet. Their home was a small unit in an aging apartment complex. Inside, it was tidy but minimal. A worn sofa, a second-hand twin bed, a card table covered with coloring supplies and snack containers. Emma settled Lily on the sofa and turned on the fan. She warmed a bowl of tomato soup and fed it to her daughter, one careful spoonful at a time. Later, after a gentle bath and 3 bedtime stories, Lily fell asleep in her small bed. Emma sat on the floor next to her, one hand resting softly on her daughter's chest, monitoring each breath. Her thoughts, as always, drifted to the envelope hidden in the cabinet. 8 months earlier, Lily had been diagnosed with a severe respiratory condition requiring specialized treatment. The pulmonologist they'd been referred to confirmed the necessity of a procedure. Soon, not immediately, but soon. The kind of soon that kept Emma awake at night. She had visited 4 different medical centers, applied for assistance programs, completed countless forms, made endless calls, but lacking coverage meant no guarantees and minimal help. She earned just barely enough to disqualify from aid programs and nowhere near enough to afford the treatment. To make ends meet, she juggled multiple jobs. After early shifts at the diner, she stocked shelves at a 24-hour grocery store deep into the night. Some evenings, she was so drained she'd collapse on the floor beside Lily's bed. She had no nearby relatives. Her mother had remarried and moved overseas. Her father was never in the picture. Lily's father had disappeared when Emma told him she was pregnant. "I'm not ready for this responsibility," he'd said, grabbing his keys. So Emma managed alone. She sold everything of value, used coupons religiously, eliminated anything unnecessary. She put on a brave face for Lily, who never complained, who always asked, "We're doing okay, right, Mama?" with eyes far too mature for her age. Emma had mastered the art of surviving, but surviving wasn't the same as truly living. That night, after Lily slept, Emma sat alone at the small kitchen table, the overhead light casting harsh shadows. She pulled out the envelope, tracing her fingers over the documents she could no longer avoid confronting. She didn't weep. She had learned not to anymore. Instead, she pressed both hands against her face, as if physically holding herself intact. Tomorrow she would return to the diner, serve meals to strangers, and pretend her world wasn't quietly collapsing. But tonight she sat in the stillness, listening to her daughter's breathing from the other room and hoping it would remain steady through the morning. The following afternoon, just as the diner was transitioning between lunch and dinner service, Emma was clearing tables when the door opened with its familiar jingle. She glanced up and froze momentarily. It was him, the man from yesterday, but now he appeared transformed. His clothes were fresh and clean. A lightweight button-down replaced the damp t-shirt, and his sandy hair was neatly styled. He looked rested, even confident, like someone who had carefully planned this return. He approached the counter with a tentative smile. "Hello," he said. "Do you remember me?" Emma raised her eyebrows slightly. Hard to forget someone who forgets both their wallet and their dinner in the same visit. He chuckled. "Fair point. I wanted to properly thank you." "You really don't need to," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, at least let me buy a meal this time," he replied. "One I actually pay for." She nodded and began preparing his order. "Chicken sandwich, you have a good memory." When she brought him the plate, he placed a $50 bill in the tip jar without drawing attention to it. She noticed but said nothing. They exchanged brief conversation. He asked about her schedule. She gave vague responses. Most people didn't genuinely want the real answer. He didn't press further, but he returned. Every afternoon, same time, same booth near the kitchen. He never brought work or seemed rushed. Sometimes he read a thriller novel. Sometimes he simply ate his meal and observed the world around him. Emma tried not to analyze it too deeply. Perhaps he was traveling through the area and needed consistency. He always ordered similar food, tipped generously, and smiled when she brought his order. Her co-worker Brittany was more interested. "He's definitely not just here for the food," she whispered one afternoon, elbowing Emma. "Maybe he enjoys the atmosphere." Brittany smirked. "Or maybe he enjoys you." Emma shook her head but felt warmth spreading across her cheeks. Several days later, Emma noticed Derek. She had finally learned his name from a credit card receipt, talking casually with Brittany near the register. He was relaxed, engaging, and he truly listened. Not the performative kind of listening, but genuine attention. The type where he recalled small details and asked follow-up questions days later. She hadn't encountered many people like that. About a week later, on a particularly warm evening, Emma stood with Lily outside the childcare center. The temperature remained high, and humidity made the air feel thick. Lily, bundled despite the heat, was cradled in her arms, breathing with difficulty. The bus was running behind schedule. Emma rubbed her back soothingly. "Almost there, sweetheart," she murmured. Headlights approached from down the street. A dark sedan slowed and stopped beside them. The window lowered. "Derek, can I give you both a lift?" he asked. Emma hesitated. She despised relying on others, but Lily was struggling, her little face flushed and damp. "Please," she said softly. They settled into the back seat. Lily collapsed across her mother's lap, her eyes closing almost instantly. Derek adjusted the air conditioning and put on quiet, instrumental music. He drove carefully, mindful not to jostle the sleeping child behind him. The car was cool and comfortable. Emma leaned her head against the window. She hadn't slept more than 5 hours consecutively in months. Lily's breathing had evened out, and the steady hum of the engine softened her awareness. Gradually, she drifted into sleep. The drive was peaceful. Derek glanced back through the rearview mirror. Emma's head had tilted to one side, her hair falling across her face. Lily was curled against her mother's chest, both completely still. When he arrived at their building, he turned off the ignition and sat quietly for a moment, simply watching them. The music played softly, a piano melody weaving through the silence. He turned in his seat, observing Emma's face, so tranquil, so exhausted. Without conscious thought, he reached back and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her eyes opened. Caught in the act, Derek froze. His hand remained suspended. "I apologize," he said quickly, voice low. "You looked uncomfortable." "I didn't mean to startle you." Emma blinked, then offered him a small, genuine smile, more real than any she'd shown before. That smile remained with him long afterward. He exited and opened the door for her. Lily didn't wake as he carefully lifted her. Emma followed silently. Derek carried the little girl up the concrete steps as if she weighed nothing. At the entrance, he transferred Lily back and set her small backpack at Emma's feet. "Take care of both of you," he said gently. "Especially yourself." Emma nodded, her throat constricted. He turned and walked away without another glance. She stood in the doorway watching the sedan disappear into the twilight, her daughter asleep in her arms, and her heart slightly more open than it had been that morning. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at the diner when Derek noticed Emma moving with less energy than usual. She smiled when addressed, but it seemed forced and hollow. Her hands shook slightly as she refilled sugar dispensers, and her posture revealed exhaustion she no longer attempted to conceal. He remained silent. Not yet. Later that evening, as he climbed into his car, something caught his attention. A manila envelope wedged between the passenger seat and center console. It must have fallen from Emma's bag when he'd driven her and Lily home. He picked it up, planning to return it, but something made him hesitate. His fingers rested on the edge of the envelope, and after a long moment, he opened it. Inside were medical reports, test results, charts, and correspondence. At the top of each document, Lily Richardson. He sat motionless in the driver's seat for several minutes, reading through the papers. The language was sterile and technical: chronic respiratory insufficiency, urgent intervention required, procedure recommended within 10 to 14 days, pediatric pulmonology consultation. But beneath the medical terminology, the reality was devastating. Lily was seriously ill and time was running out. That night, Derek couldn't rest. He lay awake in his small rental house, the glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. He thought about Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around a crayon at the diner, her head resting on Emma's shoulder, the sound of her labored breathing in the back seat. And Emma, resilient, depleted, silently keeping everything from falling apart, smiling even as she was clearly breaking inside. The next afternoon, Derek returned to the diner earlier than his usual time, the envelope in hand. When Emma saw it, the color drained from her face. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't realize I'd left that." "It's all right," Derek said calmly. "I read it." She went rigid. "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy," he added, "but I'm grateful I did." Emma looked away, her cheeks flushing. "It's not something I'd discuss with people." "I understand," Derek said, "but maybe you should." They sat in the corner booth, the one Derek typically chose. Emma stared at the table as she spoke. "She was born with weak lungs," she said quietly. "It wasn't obvious initially, but as she grew, she tired easily, got sick frequently. Eventually, the specialist said treatment wasn't optional. It was critical." Derek listened without interrupting. "We've consulted with 5 different hospitals. I submitted her records to Vanderbilt Medical Center 2 weeks ago. They have one of the top pediatric respiratory programs in the region, but they won't schedule her without financial guarantees or insurance coverage." She looked up, eyes hollow from countless sleepless nights. "I have neither." Derek didn't respond immediately. Then he leaned forward slightly. "How much time do you have?" 10 days, she whispered. "Maybe 12 at most." He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. A customer signaled for service, and Emma had to return to work. Derek stood quietly, slipping the envelope back into her bag before departing. That evening, he sat in his car outside the diner. He gripped the steering wheel, staring ahead as the world continued around him. Cars drove past. People entered and exited. But inside that vehicle, everything was silent. Then he looked at his hands and slowly closed them into fists. There was no theatrics, no declaration, just a resolution. Quiet, determined. Something crystallized in him that evening. Not just for Emma and Lily, but for Derek himself. Because for the first time in years, he was prepared to fight someone else's battle. And this time, he had absolutely no intention of accepting defeat. It began with rapid, shallow breathing, harsh, strained, alarming. Emma jerked awake from the floor where she had fallen asleep beside Lily's bed. The tiny girl lay on her side, her face pale, her breathing erratic and panicked. "Lily," Emma whispered, touching her daughter's arm. It was cold and clammy. Then came the gasping, then a desperate cry, and suddenly Lily was clutching at her throat, unable to get air. "Oh God, please no," Emma said, her voice breaking. She grabbed Lily into her arms and lunged for her phone, dialing emergency services with shaking hands. Her heart raced as she provided their location, pleaded for immediate help, tried to keep Lily conscious as her daughter whimpered against her. By the time the ambulance arrived, Lily's lips had taken on a bluish tint. Emma rode in the back, holding her daughter's freezing hand, whispering, "Mama's right here, baby. Just breathe. Stay with Mama." But when they arrived at the local emergency room, Emma's hope shattered. The facility was small and limited. The attending physician frowned after reviewing Lily's file. She needs a specialized pediatric facility. We're doing what we can to stabilize her, but she cannot remain here." "But where? How? She needs help right now," Emma cried out. The doctor was already on the phone, attempting to locate a facility with capacity, but time was evaporating. Emma stood in the corridor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, terror consuming her. Her daughter was dying and she was powerless. Then her phone vibrated. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered immediately, breathless. "Emma." It was Derek's voice, steady, commanding. "Derek." Her voice cracked. She's critical. They said she needs transfer, but they can't, I know," he interrupted gently but firmly. "Help is coming. Just hold on." "What? What are you talking about?" 15 minutes. Stay exactly where you are. Everything's arranged." Then the call ended. Emma stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. 15 minutes. The hospital staff had barely completed Lily's stabilization when the distinctive sound of rotor blades cut through the night. Nurses and physicians turned toward the windows, shocked. Outside, a sleek white helicopter marked with a private medical transport logo was descending onto the parking lot adjacent to the emergency room. Lights illuminated the entire area. The blades thundered like a storm. A man in a dark jacket emerged from the aircraft as medical personnel rushed to open the doors. It was Derek. His eyes scanned the commotion until they found Emma, who stood beside a gurney with Lily wrapped in thermal blankets, oxygen mask covering her face. He approached without hesitation. "Is she stable for transport?" he asked the attending physician. "Barely, but the window is closing fast." Derek looked at Emma. "Come with us." She stared at him in disbelief as he gently lifted Lily into his arms, holding her as carefully as if she were his own child. They ran together through the cool night air, the wind from the rotors whipping around them. Once aboard, the doors sealed, and the helicopter ascended into the darkness. Emma sat beside Derek, clutching Lily's hand, watching the monitors track her daughter's fragile heartbeat. The hum of the aircraft filled the cabin. She could barely process what was happening. Then she turned to him. "Why?" she whispered, her voice fractured. "Why are you doing this?" Derek looked at her, his eyes filled with something deep and unspoken. "Because no one was there when my sister needed help," he said quietly. "I won't let that happen again." Emma said nothing. Her lips trembled, her vision blurred. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, and finally the tears flowed. She wept, not only from terror, but from the overwhelming relief of not facing this alone anymore, of someone stepping up, of someone choosing to remain. The helicopter flew through the darkness toward Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville, where Dr. Morrison and her team were prepared and waiting, and Emma sat in the dim glow of the cabin, her daughter beside her, and a man across from her who had appeared like something from a dream, except he was tangible and real, and he wasn't going anywhere. The helicopter landed on the hospital roof just before 2 a.m. A specialized pediatric team immediately received Lily, who was rushed into the pulmonary critical care unit in a coordinated flurry of activity. Emma followed behind them, grasping Derek's sleeve like a lifeline. The following hours dissolved into a haze of paperwork, examinations, and medical consultations. Derek never left her side. He spoke calmly with physicians, provided answers when Emma's mind went blank, and handled documentation without hesitation. By sunrise, Lily was stabilized and resting in a pediatric intensive care room. Her procedure was scheduled for 36 hours later, just enough time to prepare her fragile system for what lay ahead. Emma stood at the window, arms folded, eyes fixed on the city awakening below. Exhaustion weighed on her like physical mass, but sleep seemed impossible. "Come on," Derek said softly behind her. "I arranged a place nearby, just 2 blocks from here. You need to rest." "I'm not leaving her," Emma whispered. "I'm not suggesting we go far," he offered a faint smile. "Just enough for you to clean up, maybe eat something that isn't from a vending machine." She wanted to protest, but the heaviness in her body answered for her. The apartment Derek had secured was modest and peaceful, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchenette, and a view of downtown. Emma showered while Derek prepared scrambled eggs and toast. When she emerged, hair damp and face drawn, the plate was waiting at the table. "You didn't need to do this," she began. "I know," he said. "Eat anyway." That first day passed in slow motion. They returned to the hospital after breakfast and spent the day at Lily's bedside. Derek brought a small stuffed rabbit from the gift shop. Emma read children's books in a gentle voice, trying to keep it from shaking. Whenever Lily stirred, Derek was present. He played simple games, made origami figures from napkins, and told entertaining stories that made her smile weakly through the oxygen mask. On the second day, Emma stepped out for fresh air. When she returned, she found Derek helping Lily color a picture in a hospital activity book. He held the crayon delicately in her small hand, guiding her as she drew flowers and butterflies. "Perfect," he said, beaming. "I think we have a future artist here." Emma stood in the doorway, observing them. Something warm expanded in her chest, unfamiliar and profound. That evening, Derek insisted she return to the apartment for proper sleep. "I'll stay with her," he said. "I promise." Emma hesitated. "She's safe with me, Emma." She trusted him. The apartment felt strangely empty without the quiet beep of medical equipment and Lily's presence. But for the first time in months, Emma placed her head on a pillow and fell into deep, uninterrupted sleep. The following night, the night before the procedure, she returned late expecting to find Derek gone. Instead, she entered Lily's room and stopped in her tracks. The lights were low. The machines glowed softly in the darkness. And there, slumped in the reclining chair beside Lily's bed, was Derek. His head rested against the back of the chair, breathing deeply. One arm extended across the bed rail, his hand resting gently near Lily's. He hadn't moved. Emma stood there for an extended moment, her throat tightening. She walked quietly to the bedside, knelt down beside him, and observed how their hands rested together so naturally, as if they had always belonged that way. Lily stirred slightly, but remained asleep. Derek didn't wake either. Emma whispered into the quiet voice, catching on words she had never dared speak aloud. "Maybe you're the answer to prayers I didn't know I was praying." She brushed a strand of hair from Lily's face, then one from Derek's, and for the first time in years, she felt like the burden wasn't entirely on her shoulders. The procedure lasted 7 hours. Emma paced the hospital corridor the entire time, her arms crossed tightly, her fingernails worn down from nervous biting. Derek sat nearby, silent, watchful, prepared to support her if she collapsed. When the surgeon finally appeared, mask pulled down, eyes tired but bright, Emma could hardly draw breath. "She pulled through," Dr. Morrison said. "The procedure was successful." Emma cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of tears that come from relief so profound it physically weakens you. Derek said nothing. He simply placed a hand on her back and stood beside her until she gathered the strength to enter the recovery room. Lily was pale and fragile, connected to numerous wires and monitors, but alive, breathing, recovering. Over the next 3 days, Emma never left her daughter's side. Derek visited regularly, bringing meals, checking with nurses, arranging small comforts, an extra soft blanket, a lavender-scented pillow, a new coloring book Lily could use when she was stronger. Then, on the 4th morning, Derek wasn't there. Emma found a small note tucked into her purse. "You two need time together now. No strings attached, no pressure, just healing. D." She read it 3 times. She should have felt appreciative, but all she felt was hollow. Lily noticed too. "Where's Derek?" she asked that afternoon, tugging weakly at her juice box. "He went back home for a little while," Emma said softly. "How come?" Emma had no explanation. "He was kind," Lily mumbled. "I liked him." Emma did too, more than she had anticipated. His absence created a void she hadn't realized he'd occupied. 10 days passed. Lily grew stronger each day. They transitioned from intensive care to a standard room, then were discharged with extensive follow-up instructions. Life, in its own quiet way, resumed its rhythm. One afternoon, not long after they returned home, Emma took Lily to the small park near their apartment complex. The sun hung low, casting amber light through the oak trees. Lily ran, truly ran for the first time in months. Emma laughed and applauded as her daughter spun in circles, arms stretched wide. It was the sound of approaching footsteps that made her look up. Derek stood several feet away, dressed casually, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Nothing elaborate, just stems wrapped in simple paper. He looked uncertain. "I heard she's doing really well," he said, nodding toward Lily. Emma's breath caught. "She's doing wonderful." He smiled, then hesitated. "I didn't want to intrude. I just missed you both." Emma stepped forward, heart pounding. "We missed you too." He looked down at the flowers, then back at her. "I was thinking," he said, voice lower now, "maybe I could buy you dinner again tomorrow evening." Emma stared at him, the corners of her mouth lifting, her eyes glistening, but she didn't look away. She closed the distance between them, accepted the flowers with one hand, and wrapped her other arm around him. She rested her head gently against his shoulder. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hurried. It was genuine, tender, certain. Derek held her carefully, pressing his cheek against her hair as the late afternoon sun bathed them in golden light. Lily ran toward them moments later, arms wide open. "Derek!" she shouted joyfully. He knelt down, lifting her up into his arms, holding both of them close. And in that quiet corner of the world, surrounded by laughter, light, and the scent of sunflowers, Emma allowed herself to lean in completely for the first time, without fear. 18 months later, the air in the small city outside Nashville smelled of magnolia blossoms and fresh rain. The trees were lush, the skies expansive, and the future finally felt open and full of possibility. Emma stood in the corner office of a modest building adjacent to a children's medical center. On her desk sat a framed photograph of Lily holding a stuffed rabbit, and beside it a nameplate that read, "Emma Richardson, Family Advocate, Second Chance Foundation." She had exchanged worn aprons and grocery store uniforms for this not prestige, not fortune, but meaning. The non-profit Derek had established just months after Lily's recovery had rapidly become a crucial resource for families in crisis. Now, Emma was the one coordinating with hospitals, helping desperate parents navigate bureaucracy, securing treatment, arranging transportation, booking temporary housing. Every time she helped another child receive timely care, she thought of Lily and Derek. That afternoon, as her workday ended, she walked outside and found a familiar dark sedan parked at the entrance. Inside, Lily was bouncing in the back seat, her cheeks glowing, eyes sparkling with vitality. She waved enthusiastically through the window. Emma climbed in beside her, and Derek reached over to take her hand. "Everything smooth at work?" he asked. Emma leaned against him. "All smooth. We just approved assistance for a boy in Memphis. He's being transferred tomorrow." Derek smiled. "You're incredible, you know that?" "I learned from the best," she said softly. They drove toward the lake where they had planned a quiet picnic, just the three of them. Lily ran ahead as soon as they arrived, racing down the grassy slope toward the water, laughter echoing behind her like music. She wore denim overalls and a butterfly barrette in her hair. 18 months ago, she could barely cross a room without losing her breath. Now, she was unstoppable. Emma spread out the blanket while Derek unpacked the basket. Sandwiches, fresh fruit, juice boxes, and one particular item he removed last with a subtle smile. A stainless steel thermos, sleek and silver, well used but carefully maintained. Emma raised an eyebrow. He handed it to her. "Open it." She unscrewed the lid, expecting coffee or tea. Instead, she saw the inside was empty, but engraved on the inside of the lid were words that made her throat tighten. It began with a meal, but became a home, She looked up at him, her eyes full. He shrugged, that same quiet smile on his face. I thought it was time we had something to remember. Emma didn't speak. She leaned forward, pressing her lips softly against his. Lily's voice rang out a moment later. "You!" she shouted playfully, hands on her hips. "Mum! Derek!" They both laughed. Emma pulled Derek closer, her heart full in a way she never imagined possible. They settled down together, all three of them, as the sun descended lower in the sky. Lily picked wildflowers and handed one to each of them. The lake shimmered, the air was still. And for the first time in a very, very long while, everything felt exactly as it should, because it had started with a simple meal. But what they created was a life, a home, a family. Thank you for experiencing this touching story. If it moved your heart even slightly, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell to support Heartfelt Chronicles, where compassion, love, and hope come alive through every story we share. Because sometimes all it takes is one small gesture of kindness to transform everything. See you in the next story.